Tech. Today we are going to talk about Chapter 4 of Eloquent JavaScript, Objects and Arrays. Array is a data type for storing sequences of values. So let's take a look at this example. We create a variable called list of numbers and assign an array to it. Array is written as a list of values between square brackets. So we can see the square brackets here, and then the elements are separated by comma. So in order to access the individual element in an array, we also use square brackets with the index. The index of an array starts with 0. So list of number square brackets 0 means 2. That's the first number, which has the index of 0, and then the second number has the index of 1. The second concept is properties. Properties are functions and variables belongs to a certain value. For example, every string has the length property, which allows you to get the length of a string. And then we have seen math.max. So the max function is a property of the math object. Almost all JavaScript values have properties except for null and undefined. So if you use the length property on null, you will get an error message. There are two ways to access property. The first one is with the dot operator. You can fetch the property of the value by using the dot operator, like value.length to get the length of the value. Or you can use the square brackets like in an array. So the difference between these two is with the square brackets, the x inside will be evaluated, like it will be processed, and then use the result as the property name. So we will talk about that in detail later. But you can see on the second example here, value John Doe, it's a string as a property name. So you can use the dot operator because you are not allowed to use a string with the quotes after the dots. So you have to use the brackets, square brackets. If you use the length property on an array, you will get the number of elements within the array. So methods are just functions within a value. It's like they are properties, but they belong to a certain value. So for example, every string has this function called toUpperCase, which will change all the letters within a string to uppercase. So it's a function but it belongs to a string, so it's also called method. Yep. The counterpart of the function, the method, to uppercase is to lowercase. Yep. Here are some useful methods for array. We have push, which adds a new element to an array at the end. And then we have joins, which combine all the elements together, turn them into a string. So we pass a space as an argument to joins, and the method would use that space as the separator, so that there is a space between each element. And then pop is the opposite. Pop does the opposite as push. It gets the last elements from an array and delete it from the original array. So in this example, we use pop and Mac. We will get a knife, and the original array will be just Mac and the. So the shift method does a similar thing, but as push, but it does it from the beginning of the array, which means it will thus shift is similar to pop, but from the beginning of the array. So it gets the first element from the array and delete the first element from the original array. So when we use shift on Mac, we will get Mac, and only the will be left in the original array. And then unshift is the opposite as shift. It adds an element to an array at the beginning of the array. So when we unshift John to the array, we got John and the in the array. Yeah. Here are more methods for arrays. So index finds the index of the argument you pass to the function. So for example, we want to find the index of the number 2. You will, in this array, as we can see, the number 2 is at the second place, and the index is 1, so we will get 1, and the function will end as long as it finds the first index of the number of the argument. If you want to get the index of the last element that is the same as the argument, you can use last index of. It will start from the end of the array. So in this example, the last number of 2 is at the 4th place, which has the index of 3. So we got 3 as a result. Slice cuts off a string from the star index to the end index, but the star index is inclusive and the end index is exclusive. So in this example, we cut off from index 2 to index 4. The index 2 contains the number of 2, so we will get this one, and the next one 3. But the index 4, the number at the index 4 is not included because the n index is exclusive. If you just pass one argument to the slice function, it will get everything starts from that index to the end of the string. Concat means it's short for concatenate. It combines two strings. Here is an example. We create a remove function. It takes an array and an index. So we slice the array from the beginning to the index that's passed to us, and then we concat it with the slice of itself from the index plus 1 to the end. So in the first slice, the n index is exclusive, so the elements at that index will not be included. That's how we remove the element on that index. Yeah, you should try this on your JavaScript console. Objects allows us to group values, including other objects, to make a complex structures. So here is an example. We have a variable called day1, and it's an object. It's indicated by the curly braces. So within the curly braces, we have a variable called squirrel, and the colon here, it's similar to the equal sign, which indicates the value of that variable. So squirrel has the value of false, which means it's a Boolean value. And then the second variable, we have events, and it's an array value. The third one is quite interesting. We have a string with 2 words and as the variable name, and then we have the value of a string for it. So since it's a string with 2 variables, you cannot access it with the dot operator. You need to use square brackets to access this property, as we can see in the first console log. And then the rest of the properties, you can just use the dot operator to get the value of that property. If you access a property that doesn't exist in an object, you will get a undefined as results, such as in the third console log. We try to access the wolf property of day1, but we don't have a wolf property. But you can create or add a property to an object like this. We add the property called wolf to day1 and assign a value of false to it, and then we can console log day1.wolf, and we will have the value false. So we have learned that the curly braces can indicate a block of statements and an object. In the last example, we add an a property to an object, we can also delete a property from an object. In this example, the object here has two properties. We use delete to delete the left property. So when we try to console log after that, we got an undefined as results. And if we check if the property is still in the object, we got false. But for the right property, it's still in the object. Yep. And the difference between, as you can see, after deleting the property, we got an undefined as a result. So we can assign the property to be undefined, which means we can give the property a value of undefined. The difference between undefined and delete is when you assign undefined to a property, the property still exists, but it has a value of undefined. When you use delete, the property will be removed. So arrays are just a kind of object that specifies for storing sequences of things. If you use a type of on an array, you will get the result as object. Yep. So we have properties in an array. If we want to access all the properties within an object, we can use for in statement. So look at this example. We got an object here, and then we use for to loop over the object and assign each property into the variable called prop, so that we can print out the property. We can print out each property. So take a look at the console log. We have the props, which is the name of the property, and then we have object square brackets prop. So prop will be evaluated to be the name of the property, such as A. So we will have object A. A is a string, so there is a quote here, and then we can get the value of that property. What if we use a doc operator here, like object op, object doc prop? Can we get the value of that property? The answer is not. It's no, because when you use doc here, JavaScript will try to look for the exact property named as prop, rather than trying to evaluate prop into the string A. That's the difference between the doc and the bracket square brackets. Okay. Mutability. This is an important concept. Strings, numbers, booleans, they are immutable, which means you can change the existing value. You can, but objects are mutable. What does that mean? So with objects, there is a difference between having two references to the same object and having two objects that contain the same properties. In this example, we have three objects. The first object, object 1, has the property of value which is equals to 10, and then we assign object 1 to object 2, and lastly we create a object 3 which has the same property as object 1. Okay, so when we try to console log if object 1 equals to object 2, we got true. But when we do the same thing to object 1 and object 3, we got false, because object 1 and object 2 refers to the same object, but object 3 created a new object with the same property. It's more clear to look at the diagram here. You can see object 1 and object 2 points to the same value, to the same object, but object 3 has its own object, although their properties are the same. Yeah. So when we change the value of the property of object 1, the value of object 2 will be changed too, but it doesn't affect object 3. So strings, numbers, and booleans are not objects. They cannot be changed. You cannot add or delete their properties, but they have built-in properties. Here are some useful methods for strings. We have slice. It's similar to the one in array. You pass a star index and an end index, and then it will return the fragment of the strings. You can find the index of a certain character in a string with index of. The difference between the index of in string and in arrays is you can use multiple characters with strings. And trim is very useful too. It deletes all the space and special characters at the beginning and in the end of an array. Of a string. Another, we have already seen the length property, and then if you want to get a character at a certain index, you can use character add, or just use the square brackets with an index. So there are some objects provided by JavaScript. We will take a look at some of them. The first one is arguments. Arguments is an object that holds all the arguments passed to a function. So we have talked about this. JavaScript allow you to pass more or few arguments to a function than the number of parameters of the function itself declares. Look at the example here. We have a function called no arguments. There is no argument in it, but you can still pass arguments to that function. And the second example, we have a function with 3 arguments, but you can still call it without any arguments. You won't get any errors from the both two. And if you want to find out how many arguments are exactly passed, you can use the length property, just like in array or strings. If you want to access the certain arguments, the individual argument, you can use a square brackets just like in an array. The second object is math object. We have seen it several times. Here, the concept of namespace is introduced. Namespace means using an object as a container to group a bunch of related functionality. So, such as math. The math object contains many functionalities that are related to mathematics, such as the maximum function. Why do we need a namespace? So that we can create our own functions or methods without conflicting the existing one. Like JavaScript provided some functions for mathematics, but sometimes we want our own function. Like I want a max function for myself rather than using the existing one. So I can put mine into a namespace of my object, so that it won't conflict with the one that JavaScript provided. There are many functions within the math object, like sine, cosine, tangents, and as well as pi. So pi is a constant value. In JavaScript, there is a convention. All constant values will be written in capitalized letters. And we have floor, ceil, and round. The round function rounds a number to the closest whole number, and floor rounds it down to the closest full number, and ceil comes from ceiling, rounds it up to the closest round number. And the last one is random. The random method returns a random number between 0 and 1. If we want a random number from 0 to 10, we multiply it by 10 and then you use floor to round it down to the closest whole number, and then we will have a random number from 0 to 9. Okay, the last object is the window object. It's a global scope object. Each global variable is presented as a property of this object. It's like the top object of JavaScript. So for example, we create a variable called myVar, and we use int to check if the variable is in the object windows. It will return true because it's a top scope variable, which means it's within the top scope object window. So we can access this variable with the dot operator, like windows.myVar. That's all for this chapter. Let's review what we have learned today. Arrays are a specific type of object for storing sequences of values. The index of an array starts from 0. Okay, and we have learned many methods for arrays, like length, index of, last index of, slice, and concat, as well as push, pop, join, shift, unshift. Properties and methods. Properties are functions and values within a variable, within an object or a string, all kind of values. All JavaScript values have properties except for null and undefined. The function properties of a variable are called methods of the variable. Yep. We can access properties with the dot operator or square brackets. Object allows us to group values, and we use curly braces to indicate an object or a block of statements. The difference between undefined and delete: the delete will remove it for good, and undefined will keep the variable but assign an undefined value to it. We learn the for in loop to loop over all the properties within an object. We also need to remember objects are mutable. You can add a property or delete a property, but numbers, strings, and booleans are immutable, which means you cannot add or remove any properties from them. We also learn some string methods like slice, index of. Index of can be used with multiple characters, and trim, length, character add, and we also know we can access a certain character with square brackets and the index. Namespace. Namespace is the method of using one object as a container to group many relative functionalities. And we learned the arguments objects, which contains all the arguments that are passed to a function. And then we look into more functions of the math object. And finally, we have the Windows object, which is the global scope object, contains everything of a JavaScript program. Okay, thanks for watching again, and make sure you do the exercise at the end of chapter 4. If you need any help, please comment, and make sure you subscribe so that you will get the video for the next chapter. And the next chapter is chapter 5, high order functions. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next video.